Welcome to Insight and Inspiration for Life. I'm your host, Kirk. Let's get rid of that intro. I'm your host, Ken Brantley. Tonight, our discussion will be very brief, but it's on something that is, I think, very important, and that is prayer changes things. Every day we deal with challenges, and some of them are more difficult than others. For example, you may have difficulty with a former spouse or the mother of your children. You may have difficulty trying to cope with depression or deal with issues related to finances. Whatever it is, even health concerns. But we all have our crosses to bear. It's very easy sometimes to get into the mindset of saying, why me? Why me? I can't imagine that this has happened. I know for myself personally, I deal with people in the course of my serving them during the day. And many of them have debilitating health problems. And it's hard sometimes to talk to them about making difficult decisions. I think whenever you deal with people on a very real, personal level, you have to come to grips with the fact that some things are just not in your control. Health concerns may not always be in the control of the person who's dealing with them, or a bad attitude from a spouse is not something you can control. You can only control your response. I think what I've learned over the years is that a lot of times we fret over things and become upset over things because our expectations are not met. We sometimes place ourselves in situations with individuals hoping that they will do the right thing or hoping that they will look out for more than their own selfish best interest. But a lot of times that doesn't happen. I know I've actually taken time to try to communicate with a person full of bitterness, and all I could see was just that they were consumed by their bitterness. How does that happen? How does it that we let anger and sadness and depression and a variety of things control us? How do we allow that avenue into our life? And why do we do that? Why do we choose to look at the negative instead of the positive? It's amazing. Throughout a day, we can have thousands and thousands of positive things to look at, but we'll complain about that one thing, that driver that cut us off, or that person who gave us the unkind look, or the long lines at the store, or that rude individual who just took the last parking spot that was closest to the door that you were trying to get to. Why do we do that? Why do we take the time to just focus on the negative? It's funny, I have a friend who's very, very near and dear to my heart, and I noticed that as we go from place to place, and she looks at the same things in the same world, and the same is in the same environment, but what she sees is completely different, and I think that's because of the perspective and the mindset of looking for the beauty in things. It's interesting that we don't have everything in life happen at the same time, but we do have the opportunity to choose how we respond to it. Over the years, I've seen many challenges that have come into my life, and I've had to make decisions, some of them not so good. And I remember thinking, wow, why am I facing this? Or how am I going to deal with that? I think when I came to the realization that some things are best dealt with the tool of prayer, I began to become more responsive to the need for, I feel like I'm rambling, but I became more responsive to the need for prayer, because I realized that a lot of times we worry and fret about things we can't change, or we worry and fret about things that may not even happen. We look at things in ways that may not necessarily be accurate. So what I've learned is that prayer is a tool that is most useful in dealing with just about every problem. When you have a difficult spouse and you can't tell anyone about it, take it to prayer. When you have difficulty with your finances and you just don't know where that next dollar is coming from, take it to prayer. When you have a sickness or a problem or a challenge and you just don't know how you're going to get through it, take it to prayer. I was talking with a friend of mine who's a musician, a wonderful lyricist. And the other day as we were talking, I was really very concerned about a particular issue. And as I dealt with that particular issue, she said, "You don't have to really worry. And the reason why you don't have to worry is because you have prayer." And it's funny, up until that time, I hadn't really considered the power of prayer as, well, it's not that I hadn't prayed, but I hadn't considered putting the power of prayer behind my particular issue. I think as a person who has walked through many circumstances that I would prefer not to have, I do believe that prayer has been the sustaining factor that has brought about change when things seem impossible. Now, I know many of you who may not believe in the power of prayer probably are wondering, well, what makes you think that prayer is going to change anything? You know, my prayers are going up to the ceiling, and that's about all they do, and I hear the echo off the wall, and that's pretty much it. I get up and my life is unchanged. I know there are some of you who say, well, I've prayed and prayed and prayed for something, and God didn't answer my prayer, so what about that? I've heard people who said, I've been faithful in prayer for years and years and years, and it's never resulted in any change. Well, I'm not here to answer why God answers or doesn't answer prayers, but I can tell you that prayer does change things. It can change you. It can change your circumstances. And it can also change how you look at your circumstances. I know personally that there are difficult people who come into your life and who can zap you of your energy. Sometimes you just can't deal with them because they're so negative and they're so downtrodden. But you can take it to prayer. You can make them top priority in your prayer list. It allows you to begin to look at them in a different light. These sort of stream of consciousness programs are really less structured than what I typically do. But I felt that it was really important to talk about prayer because I really believe prayer does change things. I can cite several examples in my own life where miracles have taken place simply because of prayer. I entered a hospital room some years ago, and I saw my dying sister laying out on the bed. And as she began to deteriorate, or as she had deteriorated, I remember the doctors coming in saying, she could not live without her liver, and it was in complete liver failure. And I remember they were making us aware that we should probably make plans for her demise. I remember her looking at the doctors with shock and disbelief that she was going to be gone very soon. They gave her about 3 months, and we all came to the realization that prayer was going to be the only thing that brought her back. I remember placing my hand behind her neck, and I looked down into her eyes, and I began to pray silently, believing that God would heal her. I began believing beyond a shadow of a doubt that liver failure could be dealt with through prayer. Amazingly, she is still alive, and it's much longer than 3 months. Prayer changes things. Was it a miracle? I believe so. Do I know how it happened? No. Do I think I have an idea? Does it matter? Not really. She's still here, and I get a chance to hear her voice. I get a chance to appreciate her because a prayer was answered. There are times when we don't have prayers answered. I know that I've prayed a prayer for a number of years that certain justice would come to a circumstance that I've prayed about for a long time. And it always seems that this particular prayer just never gets answered. And I remember that I placed so much stock in having this prayer answered because it would do so much. And I remember saying, I want this prayer answered. And I went down in faith, and I continued to pray. And after week 1 and week 2 and month 1 and month 2 and year 1 and year 2 and year 3 and year 4, my prayer wasn't answered, not in the way that I thought. And I continued to pray, continued believing, but it wasn't answered. And I remember getting to a point where my faith in prayer and the God who answers them began to waver. Perhaps that's where you are sometimes. And maybe at the moment you question whether or not there is even a God that exists, or whether or not he even cares. But I think for me, I always knew that he existed. I didn't know whether or not he was going to participate in my life, and sometimes I questioned whether or not he had my best interest at heart. Maybe you think the same thing, but I came to grips with one thing, that whether or not he answered my prayer, I made a decision to believe, have faith, and love him anyway. I believed that no matter how he chose to answer my prayer, that it would be the right thing, and that he would do right by those I was praying for, and he would do right by me. Sometimes we pray for things that we're not ready to receive yet. Sometimes we pray for things that are not necessarily blessings for us, which might be curses for us, and we're not certain about what we're praying and not certain of the effect it'll have. I remember a pastor saying to women who were praying for husbands that, the minute you pray for a husband, there's a lot of other things you have to get prepared for. It's kind of interesting that many of the women who were praying for husbands had more of a romantic idea of what a husband would be.